January 1943. Over the frozen mud of Guadalcanal, a lone F4F Wildcat banks hard into a turning fight with 3 Japanese Zeros. The pilot drops his flaps mid-combat, full deflection. His squadron mates think he's lost his mind. The Zeros tighten their circles, closing for the kill. Then something impossible happens. The Wildcat turns inside them. The South Pacific Air War is a war of geometry and death. Japanese fighters dominate the sky not through speed or firepower, but through one unforgiving advantage: turn radius. The Mitsubishi A6M0 can pull a full deflection turn tighter than anything the Americans fly. In a dogfight, tighter means survival, wider means a bullet in your fuel tank. American pilots know this within their first week of combat. The doctrine is clear: do not turn with a Zero. Use altitude, use speed, dive, fire, climb away. Never commit to a horizontal fight. Never try to outmaneuver what you cannot outmaneuver. The F4F Wildcat is a sturdy machine. It can take punishment, it can dive fast, but in a slow, knife-edge turn, it is outmatched. The Zero's lighter airframe and larger control surfaces allow it to bleed speed without losing lift. It can hang in the sky, rotate like a compass needle, and bring its guns to bear, while American pilots are still fighting their own inertia. By early 1943, hundreds of young men have died learning this lesson. The Pacific theater is a patchwork of coral atolls, volcanic islands, and endless blue water. There are no front lines in the traditional sense. There are only airstrips, supply lines, and the pilots who defend them. Guadalcanal is one such strip. Henderson Field, a scar of packed dirt carved from jungle and blood. The air above it hums with tension. Squadrons rotate in and out. Fresh pilots arrive pale and confident. Veterans leave gaunt and silent. The sun is relentless. The humidity makes steel sweat. At dawn, the ocean mist clings to the wings of parked fighters. By noon, the metal is too hot to touch. Mechanics work in the shade of palm trees, pulling maintenance on engines that run too hot and guns that jam too often. There is no luxury here. No depot-level overhaul. Parts are scavenged. Repairs are improvised. If a pilot brings a plane back with holes in the wings, the ground crew patches it with whatever they have and sends it back up. This is the world where logic must outpace doctrine, or men die. And it is here, in this narrow margin between survival and extinction, that one pilot begins to see what others do not. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. His name is Marion Carl. Before the war, he is a farm boy from Oregon. Quiet, methodical, the son of a school teacher and a rancher. He grows up around machines that break and must be fixed: tractors, pumps, combines. He learns early that a problem is just a system you haven't understood yet. He does not dream of flying. He dreams of engineering school. But in 1938, he sees a poster for the Navy's Aviation cadet program. The pay is decent, the training is free. He applies not out of romanticism, but practicality. Flight school is a kind of engineering. Physics made visible. He wants to understand how things work in 3 dimensions. He is accepted. He is good at it. His instructors note his precision. He does not over-control. He does not chase the horizon. He flies with the calm of someone solving an equation. During aerobatics training, while other cadets wrestle the stick, Carl flies with his fingertips. He listens to the airframe, feels the buffet before the stall, reads the wind through the rudder pedals. He earns his wings in 1939. He is assigned to fighters. He is unremarkable in appearance, average height, slim build, brown hair, a face you would not pick out of a crowd. But in the cockpit, he is different. He thinks in terms of energy states, angles of attack, moments of inertia. When the war begins, he is stationed in San Diego, then Hawaii. Then, in mid-1942, he is sent to the Solomons as part of VMF-2 Haida-23, a Marine fighter squadron flying F4F Wildcats out of Henderson Field. His first combat sortie is in August 1942. He engages a formation of Japanese bombers over Iron Bottom Sound. He downs 2. The next day, he downs 3 more. Within a month, he is an ace. But he is not satisfied. Every engagement teaches him the same lesson. The Wildcat is inferior in a turning fight. Doctrine says to avoid it. Carl understands Doctrine. He also understands that Doctrine assumes you can always choose your engagement. In reality, combat is chaos. The enemy does not wait for favorable conditions. Sometimes you are caught low and slow. Sometimes you are alone. Sometimes the only option is to turn. So he begins to experiment. He starts with the basics. The Wildcat's flaps are hydraulically actuated. They deploy in stages: neutral, half, full. Their purpose is to increase lift during landing and takeoff. In combat, they are never used. The drag penalty is too high. The control forces become too heavy. The aircraft slows to a crawl. But Carl notices something. When flaps are deployed, the wing's effective camber increases, lift coefficient rises, the stall speed drops. In theory, this means the aircraft can sustain a tighter turn at lower airspeeds before departing controlled flight. In theory. He begins testing it alone, away from the rest of the squadron. At altitude, where a mistake will not kill him. He enters a hard turn, then drops the flaps to half deflection. The nose pitches down. The drag is immediate. But the turn radius tightens. He pulls harder on the stick. The Wildcat hangs in the air, shuddering, but it does not stall. He tries it again. Full flaps this time. The effect is more pronounced. The airplane slows dramatically, but the turn is brutally tight. Tighter than he thought possible. Tighter, he realizes, than a zero at equivalent energy. The cost is altitude. The cost is speed. But in a slow-speed scissors, in a last-ditch defensive turn, it might be enough. He begins using it in combat. Not often, not recklessly. But when the situation demands it, when a zero commits to a turning fight and Carl has no altitude to trade, he drops the flaps and pulls. The first time, the zero overshoots. The Japanese pilot, expecting the Wildcat to slide wide, finds himself in front of Carl's gun sight. Carl fires. The zero comes apart. He does it again 2 days later. Same result. Word spreads slowly. Some pilots ask him about it. He explains the aerodynamics. Most nod politely. Some dismiss it outright. Flaps are for landing. This is combat. You do not slow down in combat. You do not add drag. You do not break the rules written in blood by men who learned them the hard way. But Carl keeps doing it, and he keeps surviving. The problem is not new. It is systemic. The F4F Wildcat was never meant to fight the zero. It was designed in the late 1930s when the U.S. Navy's primary concern was fleet defense. Its role was to intercept bombers, not dogfight nimble carrier fighters. It was built to be tough, armored, armed with 650 caliber machine guns. It could absorb damage and keep flying, but it could not turn. The Zero, by contrast, was designed for maneuverability above all else. Its airframe was light, its engine was powerful relative to its weight. It carried no armor. Its fuel tanks were unprotected. In a straight fight, the Wildcat could shred it with a single burst. But the Zero would never give you a straight fight. Japanese doctrine emphasized the turning engagement. Their pilots trained obsessively in aerobatics and close-quarters maneuvering. They understood energy management. They knew how to bait an opponent into bleeding speed, then snap into a tight spiral and bring guns to bear. American pilots adapted. Tactics evolved. The thatch weave. Boom and zoom. Mutual support. Stay fast. Stay high. Never fight alone. These tactics worked. They saved lives, but they also imposed constraints. You could only engage on your terms. If you were caught out of position, if you were jumped from above, if you were alone and low on fuel, the math turned against you. And there were always situations where the math turned against you. Pilots died not because they were cowards, but because they followed Doctrine in situations where Doctrine no longer applied. The institution could not adapt faster than the battlefield. The engineers were thousands of miles away. The tacticians were writing manuals based on after-action reports that were weeks old by the time they were analyzed. But the pilots were there, in the moment, with seconds to decide. Carl saw this gap. He saw that the F4F had untapped potential, not in what it was designed to do, but in what it could be made to do. The flaps were not a landing aid. They were a variable geometry tool, a way to reconfigure the wing in flight. He was not the first to think of it. Test pilots had explored flap deployment at low speeds during carrier trials, but they had done so in controlled conditions, with spotters and safety margins, never in combat, never against an opponent who would punish hesitation with cannon fire. Carl's insight was not theoretical, it was operational. He understood that in a knife fight, the advantage goes to whoever can redefine the terms. If the Zero expected the Wildcat to turn wide, then turning tight became the surprise. But surprise only works if you survive the first attempt. The risk was enormous. Deploying flaps in combat meant committing to a low-energy state. If the technique failed, if the aircraft stalled or became uncontrollable, there would be no time to recover. The Zero would close from behind and pour fire into the cockpit. Carl tested it anyway, not because he was reckless, but because he had run the numbers. He had felt the controls, he knew the margins. But knowing the margins and convincing others were two different problems. The first time he tries to explain it to his squadron commander, the conversation is short. Carl describes the aerodynamics, the increase in lift coefficient, the reduction in turn radius, the potential to reverse a defensive position into an offensive one. The commander listens, then he tells Carl to stick to Doctrine. Flaps are for landing. Combat is for speed. The Wildcat is not designed for this. The Navy's test pilots would have discovered it if it were viable. Do not reinvent the wheel. Do not get yourself killed trying. Carl does not argue, he simply continues flying. Other pilots notice. A few ask questions. Carl takes them up in two plane sections and demonstrates. He enters a simulated dogfight, lets his wingman commit to a hard turn, then deploys flaps and cuts inside. The wingman is stunned. He radios back that it should not be possible. But it is. Still, the skepticism persists. Some call it a parlor trick, a stunt that works in training but will fail under fire. Others worry about structural limits. The flaps were not designed for high G deployment. What if they fail? What if the hydraulics rupture? What if the added drag causes a flameout? Carl has no perfect answer. He only has results. He has used the technique in combat 4 times. 4 times he has survived. 4 times he has shot down an opponent who should have had the advantage. But results are hard to quantify in war. Every sortie is different. Every engagement is a tangle of variables. Maybe Carl survived because he was skilled. Maybe he was lucky. Maybe the Japanese pilots made mistakes. The technique remains unofficially tolerated. Carl is not reprimanded, but he is not endorsed either. The squadron does not adopt it. The wing does not teach it. It exists in a gray zone between innovation and insubordination. Carl does not push. He does not evangelize. He simply keeps flying the way he knows works. And then, in January 1943, everything changes. The mission is a routine combat air patrol over Guadalcanal. 4 Wildcats. Carl is flight leader. The sky is hazy. Thin clouds at 8,000 feet. Below, the jungle is a dark green smudge against the blue. The radio crackles. Bogies inbound. Bearing 340. High. Carl scans. There, 6 contacts. 2 divisions of 3. Zeros. Probably escorting a bomber formation that turned back. Now they are hunting. Carl calls the bounce. He takes his flight up and around, positioning for a high-side attack. The geometry is good. The Zeros have not seen them yet. He rolls in. picks a target, fires. The Zero breaks hard left, trailing smoke. Carl does not follow. He pulls up, scanning for threats. And there they are. 3 more Zeros, close. Very close. They must have been above, waiting. The fight disintegrates into chaos. Carl breaks right. 1 Zero follows. Another slashes across his nose, forcing him to pull hard. His airspeed bleeds. He is down to 180 knots. Too slow. The Zero behind him is closing. He calls for his wingman. No answer. The radio is jammed with crosstalk. He pulls harder. The Wildcat shudders. He is at the edge of a stall. The Zero is still closing. He has 2 choices. He can unload, dive away, and hope to build enough speed to escape, or he can commit to the turn. He drops the flaps. Full deflection. The nose pitches down. He compensates with back pressure. The airspeed drops to 150, 140. The turn radius tightens. He feels the airframe groan. The controls are heavy, sluggish. The Wildcat is barely flying, but it is turning inside the Zero. The Japanese pilot does not react in time. He expects the Wildcat to slide wide. Instead, Carl rotates through the pure vertical, pulls the nose down, and rolls out behind him. The Zero fills his gun sight. Carl fires. A 2-second burst. The Zero's wing root explodes. The fighter rolls inverted and spins into the jungle below. Carl retracts the flaps. His airspeed builds. He scans. Clear. Another Zero is on his wingman. Carl reverses hard. The Zero sees him and brakes. It is a good brake, aggressive, designed to force Carl into an overshoot. Carl drops the flaps again. The Wildcat arcs through the sky, tracking the Zero through its turn. The Japanese pilot tries to reverse. Too late. Carl fires again. The Zero's canopy shatters. The aircraft noses over and dives. The remaining Zeros disengage. They have lost 4 aircraft. The Americans have lost none. Carl returns to Henderson. His wingman lands beside him. They shut down. The ground crew swarms the aircraft, checking for damage. The wingman climbs out, pale and shaking. He walks over to Carl and asks him how he did it. Carl tells him, flaps, full deflection, trade speed for radius, but only when you have no other option. The wingman stares. Then he nods. That evening, the squadron gathers for debriefing. Carl describes the engagement, the tactics, the flap deployment, the results. This time, no one interrupts. No one dismisses it. The squadron commander asks Carl to demonstrate it again in front of the entire squadron. Carl agrees. The next morning, he takes up an aircraft with half the squadron watching from the flight line. He performs a series of turning engagements against another pilot. Each time he cuts inside, each time the flaps make the difference. The pilots see it, they understand it, and slowly, cautiously, they begin to try it themselves. By March 1943, the technique is spreading. Not officially. There are no training bulletins, no directive from Fleet Command. But pilots talk. They trade stories. They watch each other. And when someone survives an engagement they should not have survived, others pay attention. Carl rotates back to the States in April. He has 18 confirmed kills. He is awarded the Navy Cross. He is sent on a war bond tour, then reassigned as a test pilot. But the technique he pioneered remains in the Pacific. Marine and Navy squadrons begin incorporating flap deployment into their defensive tactics, not as doctrine, but as a tool, a last resort maneuver when altitude and speed are gone. Pilots learn the margins. They learn when it works and when it kills you. The results are measurable. Loss rates in turning engagements decline, not dramatically but enough to notice. Pilots who would have died in a slow-speed scissors now survive. Some even reverse the engagement and score kills. The Japanese notice too. After-action reports from captured or defecting pilots mentioned American fighters turning tighter than expected. They describe Wildcats behaving like lighter aircraft. The Zero's turn advantage, once absolute, becomes conditional. By mid-1943, the F4F Hellcat begins replacing the Wildcat in frontline squadrons. The Hellcat is faster, more powerful, and more heavily armed. But even Hellcat pilots adopt the technique. Flaps in combat, used sparingly, used wisely. It becomes part of the oral tradition of naval aviation, not written down, not taught in flight school, but passed from veteran to rookie in the ready rooms and debriefing huts of the Pacific. Carl's contribution is never officially documented. There is no memo crediting him, no tactical bulletin bearing his name, but the men who flew with him know, and the men they trained know. The logic was simple, the courage was quiet, and the ripple effect saved lives. Marion Carl survives the war. He returns to test flying. In 1947, he breaks the world altitude record in a Douglas Sky Streak. In 1953, he sets a new speed record. He flies experimental jets, rockets, and prototypes that exist only as blueprints. He retires as a major general in 1973. He lives quietly in Oregon, back where he started. He does not write a memoir. He does not tour the airshow circuit. He does not seek recognition. But in the archives of naval aviation, his name appears again and again, in after-action reports, in interviews with surviving pilots, in the margins of tactical manuals written decades after the war. They remember the man who turned with zeros. The technique itself fades. Modern fighters have variable geometry wings, fly-by-wire systems, and thrust vectoring. They do not need flaps to turn. But the lesson remains. Innovation does not wait for permission. It does not come from committees or headquarters. It comes from the edge, from the men and women who see the gap between what is and what could be, who test the margins, who risk failure in pursuit of a better answer. Carl's genius was not in defying authority. It was in understanding the machine better than the people who built it. He saw the F4F not as a fixed system, but as a toolbox. He asked what else it could do, and then he proved it. The war was full of such men. Engineers who redesigned engines in the field, mechanics who kept crippled bombers flying, pilots who rewrote tactics in real time. Most of them are forgotten. Their names are not in textbooks. Their innovations are attributed to institutions, not individuals, but they were there. In the cockpits, in the hangars, in the desperate hours when logic and courage were the only weapons left. Marion Carl died in 1998. He was 83. He was shot and killed during a robbery at his home. It was a stupid, senseless death for a man who had survived hundreds of combat missions. But what he left behind was not senseless. It was a method, a way of thinking, a reminder that the rules are not the limits, only the starting point. And that sometimes the man who survives is not the one who follows the manual, but the one who understands it well enough to know when to set it aside.